Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey guys, just wanted to give you a quick little message of one of my favorite new product lines out there. Ideal for the low carb athlete to fuel before, during, and after your workouts. This company is called Equip Foods. Equip is one of my favorite supplement brands as they provide some of the shortest ingredients lists in the industry, which is hard to find, with products made from 100% real food, no junk, no chemicals, no artificial flavors or fillers. Their best seller is what I've been using, the Chocolate Prime Protein, which is actually a grass-fed beef protein powder providing a whopping 21 grams of complete protein in each scoop with only 3 ingredients, and you don't even taste them. Grass-fed beef protein, stevia, and cocoa. Now, don't worry, despite its simplicity, it does taste incredible, not like beef. That would not taste good in my shake. Equip also has a 1-ingredient collagen powder made from grass-fed bovine collagen, providing incredible benefits for your joint health, skin, and recovery. Plus more, ideal for the aging athlete. Equip is currently having its biggest sale of the year to date, so if you're interested in checking out Prime Protein, collagen, or any of their other products, as I like the pre-workout WOD before my strength training sessions, get up to 25% off. Head to equipfoods.com/low-carb-athlete. So you can use your code low-carb-athlete and get a deal. Enjoy. Hello, low-carb athletes. I want to give a little intro to my guest today. Her name is Michelle Hurn, and we're going to talk about eating as a low-carb athlete, how you can fuel yourself for endurance sports. So Michelle has her own journey, similar to mine, of having some burnout and breakdown of body systems, but she lost her health in 2019, so not too long ago. She's dreamed of qualifying for the Olympic trials in the marathon, but years of high-intensity exercise and very high-carb, high-sugar, all foods in moderation, quote-unquote, diet had left her completely broken. Michelle said she wasn't recovering from her workouts, from her runs. She was breaking out in cold sweats, and her anxiety was through the roof. She was hungry, angry, and started to feel very depressed. So I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this as a high-performing individual, high-charging athlete. At the same time, Michelle was practicing as a dietitian in a hospital and saw the same high-carb guidelines failing for her patients. When she decided that she was in too much pain and she's too exhausted to run anymore, she switched to a low-carb, high-fat, animal-based diet. In less than 3 weeks, her life of long anxiety diminished and she regained her health. She was able to start running again, but she also won 2 ultra races, and she's completed even more. And then she did the Tunnel Hill 50-mile run that she won. So it was pretty impressive. So we're going to talk about how her life has changed, going from a standard American diet to a low-carb, high-fat, animal-based diet. She wrote a book. We're going to talk a little bit about that and sharing stories of how low-carb, high-fat diets can benefit different disease states, and how athletes really, were told different information, and how you can argue both sides of the coin, but how low-carb diet can actually be liberating for people that have eating disorders, and how it often restricts carbohydrates can be challenging for some people, but Michelle says others. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Of course, I like to talk every episode with our guests lately on carb timing. Are all carbs evil? Should we have carbs? When should you have them? About fasted exercise. Should you eat before your workout or not eat? And how, matching our fueling and our training. Intermittent fasting, testing and not guessing with any biometrics or a ring or a Whoop, but NutriSense levels, sometimes with CGM. So we're going to dive into all of that. So let me know if you have questions and comments. Just head to the show notes and you can email me directly from there. Or if you're listening or watching on our YouTube channel, Low Carb Athlete, you can message me there and I will respond. So if you see the show notes, you'll have all the links for Michelle Hurn, and she's actually speaking at a lot of the same events I am this year. So it'll be really fun to finally connect with people over the last 2 years that we haven't seen about, connecting live on low carb events. So let's bring on Michelle and let her share her story herself.
All right, gang, I'm keeping with my theme, talking about intermittent fasting, carbs. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they evil? For the low carb athlete, all things to help you be the best version of yourself, as we all want to look our best, feel our best, and perform our best in life. So I connected with Michelle Hurn to talk about her experience, her journey, and what she's up to and helping share this information as well. So thanks, Michelle, for coming on the Low Carb Athlete podcast today.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me on.
So talk about, we kind of introduced you in the bio, but let's kind of, what's your why on what you do? I always love to, like, we all have a reason what we're doing here and what our purpose and passion is. So talk about what your purpose
Absolutely.
is.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll really quickly, my story really starts, when I was 12, I had a very serious eating disorder. I was diagnosed with anorexia, and I was 5 feet tall and 57 pounds. And so I ended up in inpatient treatment for 2 months. Saw a traditional dietitian and was weight restored, but was told that I would suffer with severe anxiety for the rest of my life. And that became my reality. I've just decided I'm just going to have to become this person, this high functioning person with, severe anxiety, eating disorder tendencies. I went in high school, I became an athlete, I ran in college. And for my entire life, I followed a very high carbohydrate, relatively, I like to say what you think is healthy, right? Lots of whole grains, lots of fruits and vegetables. And I suffered with all kinds of problems. I had periods of my life with pretty severe depression, like I said, very severe anxiety, had lots of different injuries, aches and pains. But you're just told like, hey, that's just normal. That's part of being an athlete. But it wasn't until I lost my own health in 2019 I actually decided, I'm never going to be able to run again. I was at that point trying to qualify for the Olympic trials. I'd run a 2:54 marathon. And at that time you had to run under 2:45. And, I was training really hard and my body just stopped recovering. I wasn't recovering well from my runs. And so I contacted 2 different sports dietitians and they all told me I needed to eat more calories, more carbs. I was eating about 350 grams of carbs at that time. So I started eating 450 grams of carbs, and my performance went from struggling to basically falling off a cliff. I was getting cold sweats. I'd been used to being able to run 10, 15 miles at a time. I'd go out for a 2-3 mile run and I'd break out in a cold sweat. My body felt achy and tired. And so finally, I kind of had my come to Jesus moment. I was working as a dietitian in acute care, and I just had a tough day at work. I had a patient pass away. I came home early and I was in pain. I fell asleep at like 5 p.m. that night. And I woke up at like 2 a.m. It felt like my body was on fire. Like I didn't know what to do. At that point, I had tried so many different things. I actually ended up driving to a 7-Eleven and getting 30 pounds of ice, putting it in the bathtub, sitting in the bath. So it's 3 a.m. I'm in an ice bath. I'm crying. And my wife came in and said, you know what? I think it's time we do something different. And I said, you're right. I'm done. I'm tired. I was physically, mentally, spiritually broken. I said, you know what? I'm too old to run. I was 36. I'm like, why am I trying to be competitive? This is silly. And so I decided I would adopt a very low carbohydrate diet. Like, heck, I knew intuitively carbohydrates didn't make me feel great, but I was told over and over again, you have to have these to run, especially if you want to run competitively. And so I was like, well, if I'm not going to run competitively, why do I need so many carbohydrates? And so, well, if I'm not going to run at all, why don't I, do a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet? So, and my only goal at this time, adopting this way of eating, is I didn't want my body to feel like it was on fire anymore. My muscles hurt so badly. And what I found, the first week of going through this way of eating, just very high meat, high fat, no carbs, is, my energy was good and my body wasn't hurting. But I kind of attributed that, well, I'm not running. But I'll tell you what, the 3rd week of eating this way, I came home from work and my wife said, will you come sit next to me? And I said, yeah, what's going on? And she said, I don't know if I like this way of eating yet. This is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you.
Wow.
And she was right. I wasn't having anxiety. I wasn't thinking about food. I was just eating and moving on with my life. I was feeling good and satiated. My brain was functioning.
Mhm.
And that's when I said, you know what? I've got to get this out. I've got to talk to people. Like, I thought since I was 12, I was going to have anxiety forever. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have any anxiety. And, you know, I'd given up the dream of running competitively. But about a week later, I was just home more, you know, I wasn't running. And my wife is an introvert. She appreciates solace. And she just kind of casually said, like, hey, you're annoying me. Would you go for a run? And I was like, well, you can't run without carbs. And I said, you know what? Drop the ego. I'm going to go jog. It's fine. And I went out and came back an hour later. I just felt great. And that's when I started to dream again. I thought it was over. I thought I'm never going to run again. And if I do, I thought like maybe I'd jog with my nieces or nephews, right? Just messing around. And my wife is so excited. She said, oh, this will be great. Well, you can be a, you know, recreational runner. We'll go to a trail every once in a while. And I said, how about I run an ultra marathon? And, you know, and the rest is history. She wasn't super excited about that idea. But, you know, I connected with Zach Bitter, who at that time was the 100-mile world record holder, and said, hey, I have this crazy dream. Like, I want to try to run an ultra. I've never run more than a marathon. Will you help me? Let's see. Can we do this? Does this work? And he was great. So let's give it a whirl. Let's see how it goes. And, you know, I had my first ultra set it was supposed to be in March of 2020. But as we know, COVID hit. And so that was canceled. And I said, okay, let's regroup. We scheduled one for October, and that quickly got canceled. And then finally, November 7th, 2020, a small ultra marathon went on outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. And I was just so grateful to toe the line. And it was a 6-hour timed race. And I won. I covered 44.63 miles. That's an 8:04 pace.
Wow.
In 6 hours.
That's awesome. That's great. So going back to your story, did you ever identify any hidden internal stressors that we say hidden stands for hormone imbalance, immune dysfunction, digestion, detoxification, energy, nervous system? Did you run any labs to identify what is going on under the hood when you were feeling all that anxiety issues and all the other symptoms?
Yeah, you know, I had lab tests done, and that was probably one of the things for me that was the most frustrating, was everything kept coming back normal. You know, at one point I had a lab test done that said I was low in magnesium, you know, and so my primary care doctor at the time, she's no longer my primary care doctor, said, oh, you're feeling depressed. You just need to eat some more spinach. That will help. And I just said, nah, there's something stronger than that. You know, there's something deeper than that. And I certainly, you know, as a high carbohydrate athlete, I remember feeling, you know, after I'd eat, I was hungry all the time. You know, I'd have these periods of like euphoria. You felt so great after eating, and then I'd crash down a couple hours later. I did once have a fasting blood sugar test, and my blood glucose was 40. And the doctor was like, this is way too low. And I was like, I didn't even feel too bad at that point. So, you know, there was definitely signs early on that this wasn't going well. And in 2011, I was also severely anemic to the point that I required 5 iron IVs. Wow. But I also didn't, you know, we don't teach. I'm a dietitian, but I was never taught about like bioavailability. I certainly wasn't taught about, you know, things like phytic acid and all those other things in plants that potentially bind to iron. So even though I was taking iron supplements, I was eating so many grains and seeds that, you know, nobody said like, hey, this could be potentially binding to this. So.
Yeah, but you didn't run any functional labs as the Dutch test or Genova GI stool test to identify if you had gut inflammation, hormone disruption or anything. I just would be curious to see a full thyroid panel and look at organic acids and really see what's going on. Regular doctor labs don't do any of that.
No, I did have like some of the thyroid, like the T4, you know, some of those done, because I was like, you're trying to figure out what's going on. And yeah, nothing, everything came back normal. I did see a naturopathic doctor at one point and was put on various supplements and nothing, but no, some the tests that you're specifically referring to, no, I didn't have those done.
Yeah. I mean, I went through like 9 different doctors when I was trying to get answers back in 2013 when I had issues with adrenal exhaustion, air quotes, but that, you create this metabolic chaos in your body, and you don't really have, it's not just one thing, it's all over, external stressors and hidden internal stressors that accumulate and overfill your bucket of stress. It causes all these imbalances, which includes, what we eat. And eating a high carbohydrate diet for your body obviously caused, blood sugar dysregulation, having that really low blood sugar. But it's always kind of fun nowadays. We can run all these labs to identify some hidden things, but also just do a CGM to test what's going on during the day when I'm eating. And now we know, like, we can match our nutrition to our training, and how, if you're doing endurance training, is that you're probably burning mostly fat, especially doing ultras. You have to be in fat burning stage, or else you'd be eating like 1,000 gels every 20 minutes. But so what about your training to become fat adapted and working with Zach Bitter? Were you training by a heart rate monitor and working kind of that maffetone when eating minus your age range, or how are you training to be a fat adapted athlete?
Yeah. So, I have a Chorus watch that gets my heart rate, but I think sometimes people get real excited about stuff like that. I'm not a huge data nerd. I was very fortunate. I got to go to Kenya. I got to go to Iten when I was 20 years old. And I remember I was like, what are we running today? They're like, fast. Well, how fast? And they looked at me like I was stupid, like fast, like quick. I think sometimes we get too excited about that. But I did have to be very careful, because so much of my running as training for, trying to be a fast marathon runner was very intense, was anaerobic, right? Or kind of right on that threshold. So, and this is something I would always caution people with when you're transitioning to a lower carb diet. I remember Zach saying, like, we're going to have to do really easy, like low volume. Like, you got to be okay with grandpa passing you. Like, if your easy pace is 7:30 to 8 minutes, it's about to be 9 minutes, really getting used to, like, a bit humbling with your ego. But just, I was liking how I felt so much, and everything was so new and exciting to me that I kind of was able to kind of tap into, like, this feels really easy, but I like the heart rate monitor too, because it can kind of almost keep you in check. You can look and you'll be like, no, my heart rate's a little too high. Because I kind of found, like, especially for my easy runs, as long as it was like 130 or so, I was fine. Where moderate, I want to keep around 140, and certainly racing, 150 to 160, even a little higher towards the end. So that's what we did.
So what did you do to become so-called fat adapted or metabolically efficient fat burning athlete nutritionally? So training wise, you went slower, kind of the maffetone style, that you go lower heart rate, go longer, comfortable, easy pace until you build that base up. And then nutritionally, what type of phase? You said you felt better right away. What did you do? What was a big change? Were you eating high carb with grains and gluten in there that can cause irritation, your gut wall lining, mucosal damage, and cause leaky gut and leaky brain, having that anxiety issue? What kind of pre fat adapted phase?
Like, I tell you, I had tried so many different things because I had anxiety for such a long time. But yeah, my diet before I was a fat adapted athlete, I would say, was a pretty standard runner diet. I would and I even did some runs fasted, but I would have, my breakfast was almost always, oatmeal, fruit, some whey protein, peanut butter, coffee with cream and sugar. I'd have a snack usually before lunch, like a piece of fruit or granola bar. Lunch was like chicken and rice, maybe some, oils in there. Dinner, we had meat. Dinner would be like a little bit of beef and gluten-free pasta and tons of vegetables. And I was always hungry, so I'd have like a piece of cake or a couple cookies. So I would say, once again, probably 350, sometimes 400 grams of carbs a day. I usually, after hard runs, I'd have like a maltodextrin whey protein drink. If I didn't eat every few hours, I would get a little dizzy or shaky. I'd always have a granola bar or something close by. And I just thought that was normal, I remember towards the end of, my high carb days, I was with a friend. I was driving. We were driving to an event, and I literally broke out in a cold sweat. I had to pull over. And she was like, "What is wrong with you?" I was like, "I'm sorry. Like, I don't know. I just ate a couple hours ago. What's going on?" So yeah, that's what that was my diet. And it could not have been more different. So I was still working at the hospital at this time as a dietitian. So, it was me and 3 other women, and I'd go in there and they're eating their bagels and bananas, and I'm in there with a pound of ground beef and butter. Like, well, this is a different, I would run in the morning. I would run, fasted. I'd have some coffee with heavy cream, go for a run and come back and have beef and butter. And I had that like twice a day. I'd have liver sometimes in the morning as well. And then in the evening, I'd have, my wife would cook usually the same thing, beef, steaks, butter, lots of salts, ate very, very simply for those first 30 days. My carbohydrate intake was almost zero, very, very low. And, I was always kind of scared. I remember I'd pack like carrots or something like I was just nervous. What if I have this like hypoglycemic episode? I can't have this happen when I'm at work. But I always felt fine. I was almost shocked by how much meat and fat I ate. It seemed strange to me. You hear so much now about like, oh, meat will kill you and meat's bad, which is all nonsense. And, I had a lot of people make comments like, oh, are you always going to eat like that? That's gross. That's weird. But I don't know. I can just tell you intuitively. I felt like what I was doing was good. I think my poor body just needed the iron and the B12 and the folate and all the things I just hadn't really had for so long. So yeah, my diet those first 30 days was very, very beef heavy, butter heavy, tallow heavy, salt heavy, and coffee heavy. And then after that, I started to add back in carbohydrates because then our volume changed. And I think that's where some people get a little confused. Some people think, do I always need to be 0 carb or less than 25 grams of carbs? But yeah, you can even be in ketosis with, Zach, my coach. He would have 150 grams of carbs a day and still be in ketosis because you're exercising so much. So after that point, yeah.
But let's hold on there. So going back to the first 30 days, you went from going 300-400 grams of carbohydrates a day to just clean, really low, 30 days, just shut it down with the carbs and just focus on kind of nose to tail proteins. You're eating animal meat, but you're also doing the liver. So you're getting all this great vitamin, nutrients, minerals from the food you're eating, and then having healthy sources of fat as the tallow and the ghee. And you just shifted to that. Did someone guide you in that transformation of going from standard typical diet to a higher kind of keto carnivore type of food plan? You just jumped in.
There was a couple of people I was talking to on, social media. But it was a little bit like I'm my own guinea pig, and it was kind of exciting. It was kind of scary, coming from the history of having an eating disorder where my whole life I had always thinking about meals and food and what am I going to have next. And it honestly felt quite liberating to just eat a lot and be full and not think about it. And almost challenge myself like, wow, I can't believe I just ate a whole pound of meat. That's, but feel okay with it. It was really cool. And I wouldn't necessarily maybe tell somebody to do this without any guidance, but no, I just kind of went for it.
Yeah. Well, I think what I find is once people kind of get to that fat adaptive phase, I teach them intuitive fueling, intuitive training, and start to learn how to find out like, okay, that's enough for me. I don't want to have to count macros, count calories, and really just go by, okay, that fills me up, or I need more of that. And if I feel hungry in between meals and I need to snack, then I didn't eat the right ratio of macros for my body, and really personalizing the nutrition plan for athletes, that it is N=1 experiment, and you kind of can adjust how much you need. And you're a small, petite person that's burning a lot, running a lot of, hours a day. You're probably active. So it's going to be different for each person. So it is, not a one size fits all approach, but here, is a fat adaptation process that we say, 2 weeks to 6 weeks, depending on the person. And then you can add in carbs. So talk about that transition to going really low carbohydrate in that first 30 days or so. And then how did you determine your carb timing and what type of carbs, and, what you knew how much to take without getting out of that fat burning state, which we do want sometimes to be metabolically flexible, go in and out. So talk about your process there.
Sure. And I really appreciate too that you talk about being intuitive, because, there's this whole book about intuitive eating. And I honestly don't think you can eat intuitively if you're eating the standard American diet. I think it sets you up to always be hungry. But when you are eating a low carb diet, I think you finally stabilize your hormones. You actually can eat intuitively, which is really beautiful. So after about, I'd say probably 30 to 40 days into it, my volume was starting to increase. I was working with Zach, and this is when I had some guidance. I was like, okay, here we go. Like, is it time to start adding some carbohydrates back in? And he said, yeah, I think this would be a good idea. And what he believes, and this is what I've adopted and has worked really well for me, is, when it comes to what carbohydrates to add back in, there really isn't a quote unquote magical carbohydrate, right? People send me messages all the time. What do you think about honey, berries, this and that?
Mhm.
And I really believe it's kind of one half dozen another, because I'm not looking at any carbohydrate to really provide me like vitamins and minerals, right? Like I'm getting that from my other sources of nutrition, from the meats and the organs and things. But I want to use the carbohydrates, potentially for performance, potentially to preserve some glycogen. So I was like, okay, let's try a few things that just sit well with my stomach, that I actually want to eat, that I enjoy eating, And so I started just very simply, we I live in the Pacific Northwest, so we have a lot of nice produce. I started with some berries and some carrots, and that seemed great, So I started with about 25 to 50 grams of carbohydrates, and I split it in 2 doses. I made sure I always had some carbohydrates in your post-run meal, which I think makes sense, right? Your body is going to be more apt to absorb. And I would have some carbohydrates at the end of the day with my evening meal. And that worked really well when my volume was probably 40 to 50 miles. And then as it increased to 70, then it was like time to re up again. And so that's another thing I encourage people too, just to be willing to be flexible. I think it can be kind of scary if you, like me, if your health was just so poor and you had all this healing and success with a really, really low carb diet, to start adding stuff back in, because you're like, oh, I don't want to feel crappy. But just being open to like, okay, well, let's try it. And, you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. And so for me, I found that, a few things didn't settle with my system really well. There were certain vegetables, like some of the nightshades, and my wife avoids those anyway because of inflammation. But I was like, oh man, I don't feel very good when I have tomato sauce or tomatoes. But I found, like I said, carrots settled really well. I've done some white rice. A little bit of fresh fruit. We make like a long fermented sourdough. So yeah, I found for me, about 100 grams of carbs a day is my baseline when I'm over about 50 miles a week, and I'm not afraid to kick it up to 120, 150 if we're really, those final super intense weeks where you might be 80 plus miles. And I just divide it in 2 doses. I'll have 1 dose after I usually run in the morning after that run, and then the second dose with the evening meal.
So did you kind of feel that? I feel like there's a lot of people saying carbs are evil and all carbs are, eliminate them all, especially if you're carnivore. You don't necessarily need carbohydrates as starchy carbs, as sweet potatoes, rice, starchy vegetables, because you can still create glucose from gluconeogenesis via your protein. But for athletes, I find some people want sustainability because food tastes good, that I'm not going to do pure carnivore because that's boring to me. But that some people say, timing your carbs. So post workout, when you're hungry, not, I think you should wait 90 minutes after you work out unless you're having a shake, to eat solid food, to let your muscles absorb that when you're more insulin sensitive. And then you can have more of your carbohydrates at nighttime and your meal at night, dinner time, 3 hours before bed. But then, figuring out carb timing, because I think a lot of people starting to hear from one camp, as Peter Defty says, you hear this one camp, 0 carbs, carbs are bad, stay away from them, be ketogenic, be carnivore, versus, like Peter calls it, optimal fat metabolism, that you can have carb timing, and carbs can be rocket fuel. And you can actually, and I work for Ben Greenfield, he's, has a lot of athletes refuel carb refeed at nighttime, as you said, like 100 to 200 grams for some people, and they can actually help their sleep and help their workout the next day. So how do you find, what you're hearing out there saying, well, you don't need carbs. Carbs are not necessary. Why are you even taking them?
I always come back to context. Context is incredibly important. There's a very different, if let's say somebody who is 400 pounds, who is diabetic and who is not exercising at all, will really benefit from a 0 carb diet, probably for a significant amount of time until they're, insulin sensitive, metabolically flexible again. I'm just going to say, people reach out to me, a young lady who's, 20 pounds underweight, recovering from an eating disorder, will probably be okay eating some carbohydrates. The human body, we do know is able to utilize and process some carbohydrates. And throughout evolution, humans ate carbohydrates. You certainly, depending on where you lived, if you lived closer to the equator, you had more access to vegetation. But it was a very small amount of carbohydrates, and they looked very different, than they do today. It's the carbohydrates we ate throughout evolution were bitter, very low starches and sugars. But throughout evolution, there was no society that was purely carnivore. That's not to say that I don't think the carnivore diet is healthy, healing, can be sustainable. I think a lot of people do great with it. I'm a huge advocate and fan of it. But if you want to be an endurance athlete, I do believe there's a limitation for gluconeogenesis if you're exercising a lot. And I mean, and I can only speak from my own experiences. I think if I have too many carbohydrates, I know it actually impacts my anxiety. So in my perfect world, my wife and I argue about this, I'd probably have 20 grams or less, but that doesn't support my running. I have found that in order to support my running, it behooves me to have some carbohydrates in the meal after I run, because just like you said, okay, protein will absolutely go through gluconeogenesis to refuel glucose, but protein is so important. Protein has tons of functions in the body. We really want protein. We don't want to be using protein. We don't want to be using it solely for gluconeogenesis and not have it do all of its other functions. I mean, protein is important in your immune system and your hormonal production and keeping you, your hair, your muscles, everything. And if I am Bob, who likes to walk around the block twice a week for 20 minutes, you're probably fine with minimal carbs. But if I'm Michelle or Debbie, who's running 50, 60, 70 miles a week, you really will benefit from some carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are not good or bad, in my opinion. I think we can all agree that ultra processed carbohydrates are bad for everybody, right? But when you utilize them strategically and in small doses, I see no, small being relative, I see no reason why you shouldn't. And I also, like you said, I have found that having some carbohydrates in the evening for me does improve my sleep. So,
yeah, I just think it's something kind of I feel passionate about sharing with people on this podcast. And that's kind of my focus this season, is to explain low carb athlete doesn't mean zero carb. It means, like we just said, it could be 100 to 200 grams a day. It doesn't mean zero carbs and carbs are all evil. It means eat real food that balances your blood sugar and fuels you for your exercise as needed, and timing your carbohydrates matching your carbohydrate or your nutrition intake with your exercise. Like I have a client today's his rest day. He's just doing some mobility work, some easy walking, low heart rate cardio. He's not going to have big sweet potato, high carb dinner today because he doesn't need that. But then like the higher intensity workout day, or if he did a double workout, I'm going to have a little bit more. So I think it's just important to share that. My other thought is with eating disorders, and, I used to, when back in the day, work in college when I ran the fitness centers there, and a lot of people had eating disorders. I think there's a lot of athletes with eating disorders because that's kind of that we start to run from something. I always think, why are you training and racing? What are you running from? What are you running for? And a lot of people start to have, I worry about people doing too much fasting or too low carb when they're exercising a lot and have a different type of orthorexia, just another type of eating disorder, because we are fixated on keeping it zero carb and not doing that intuitive eating and training and learning how to fuel properly by listening to our body, rather than we're looking at, if it's glued to macros and these days instead of calories, that's like, are we being healthy and kind and loving to our own bodies and respecting what we need versus I hear this, I only need 50 grams total carbs a day. It doesn't matter. And we start to have another fixation, body image type of disorder. What do you think?
Until people get off social media. No, just kidding. I have a love-hate relationship. So and I hear that, and that would be probably one of my concerns. Like I actually think, I just had a whole presentation on why I think a low carb, high fat diet can actually benefit people with eating disorders. But it's very, very, very important to note that that is a high calorie diet. It is a 5,000 plus calorie diet. This is not, I'm struggling with eating, so I'm eating 1,000 calories of meat and fat. This is, I'm eating 3,000+, yeah, it's really unfortunate that people, they'll see one thing like, oh, it's low carb, and then kind of like take it to the extreme, where the goal would be, okay, this is information. I can see this can stabilize my blood sugar. I can utilize fat for fuel. How can I make this work for my body? And I'm going to always make sure that I'm getting enough. And I would tell anybody who's ever struggled with an eating disorder, especially particularly anorexia, you don't get to fast. Sorry. Life's not always fair. I don't intermittent fast. I mean, if you're doing a long run in the morning, you might not necessarily eat, but I don't. I just know that, that's not in the cards for me, because I've struggled, and I'm already needing to get most days my goal is about 3,500+ calories. I don't measure, I don't count, I don't weigh, but I know approximately, and I'm always going to lean on the side of more. I'd rather have more than not enough. And if you're not at that place, then you probably, you probably shouldn't be running, to be honest with you. We're just keeping it real. Because I think running has been one of the most positive things in my life. Like people say, like you said, what are you running from? Well, what are you running towards? What are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? I think you could certainly flip that around. But yeah, I've seen way too many people in the low carb space that, they're, oh, this diet's so great and so healthy. And I'm looking at them like, God, you look way too thin. You don't look healthy, at all. So what are you promoting, or what kind of image are you getting out there? And so it is very important that if you want to adopt this, way of eating, that you're not turning it into another restrictive eating disordered regimen. If you're an athlete, I would say any athlete, you need to be okay eating 100 grams of carbohydrates minimum. Of course, if you're going to be fat adapted, you might start less, but I would really encourage any athlete, especially endurance athlete, to not go into this thinking like, how do I just get to eat meat and fat and that's it,
Yeah, I think, going to the fasted exercise, another topic to dive into. One is, first thing note here is low carb doesn't mean, low carb, high fat. I think what we're hearing more of is kind of that keto carnivore, just clarify, is adding more protein. And what I, had an amazing podcast with Rob Wolf talking about this, and, talking a little more and more people, like even Dr. Mindy Pelz, and is that we need more protein in female athletes. And Dr. Stacy Sims is against fasting in women, doing keto, but it's more about having higher protein. I think everyone is coming to that conclusion that it's not just keto doesn't mean just eat so much fat. People are forgetting the proteins. And I think that's something to really express to female athletes, aging athletes in general, that we need that protein. And before we go to fasted exercise, I just want to throw that in there, because I know, we hear about eating fat. I think so many people into keto world and keto endurance that they're just forgetting the main replacement in there is having that more protein. So
yeah, thank you for saying that.
But sharing that higher fat, higher protein, and that 0.8 to 1.0 grams of protein is suggested for athletes and aging athletes, and females, especially females. So just want to throw that in. Okay. So fasted exercise. I think one, you mentioned about people with eating disorders shouldn't fast. And I'm a big believer in that, because I'm finding people with any addictions. I have clients that I know are, had issues with alcoholism or whatever it is, that just go all in and go OD, on whatever. And I find that with fasting, and I'm finding that with fasted exercise for athletes, that they're doing it too much. And we're type A driven, ambitious individuals. High performers are just taking, fasted exercise, let's take it extreme. They're doing these, 24 to 72 hour fast. They're doing a lot of fasted exercise. And I think we forget, one, how to have a good, healthy relationship with food when you do eat, instead of avoiding food completely. That's a big number one thing there. And then two, I want to dive into, is fasted exercise, works for you or not works for you? So talk about number one is that relationship with food. Have you found that, like you mentioned, fasted exercise, avoiding eating because it's so complicated, or it stresses you out, or anxiety, your experience with eating disorder background, is that kind of the fasting relationship for athletes?
Yeah, I think it can be. Like I've seen, there's some really good data for, for obesity and for various cancers that, 24, even long-term fasting can be beneficial. And I think if you had like a glioblastoma or some type of medical condition, working with the doctor, that's a completely different context, obviously, as being an athlete. Like, yeah, if God help me, if I was ever diagnosed with something like that, I would want to look more into long-term fasting. But outside of that, I think that, like you said, I'm incredibly driven. Nobody tells me to get up and run. I'm doing it every day. It can be 100. We had 116 degrees here last summer. I ran in, the coldest I ran is -25, so I'm pretty driven. I'm all in. And so unfortunately, I think the fasting mindset can kind of be a slippery slope, and I don't, being an athlete is you're always kind of walking that line, right? You're trying to recover and fuel. And it's just, my experience is, I want to lean on recovery and fueling more. And the people in myself and people I've worked with, if you start eating less, and you start kind of opening longer windows where you're not eating, eventually it can kind of come back around to bite you in the butt, meaning your recovery is stalled, you don't feel good, you start to have racing thoughts or, worrying about food. Where, like you said, the goal should just be like, we're running, we're eating relatively intuitively, and we're moving on with our life. And so, for my easy runs, I usually, I don't eat before I run. I'm sponsored by S Fuel. So I use their Train product, which is just a collagen and MCT oil. But I eat quickly after that. I'm having 3 meals a day. I don't do 2. Sometimes I even have more, if my body needs more calories, I'll have a keto brick or something in the middle of the day. So and I'm certainly, for my longer runs, really long runs, when you're preparing for a race or high intensity efforts, I will have, carbohydrates during my runs and after. So once again, just because we're low carb doesn't mean we're no carb. And we're also using carbohydrates, strategically and relatively intuitively. I don't like the mindset of kind of this all or nothing. I don't think that works in most cases, especially not in endurance athletes.
Yeah, I think it is, the relationship with food and avoiding it. It's hard because, I did all this stuff. Well, I started getting, you were just a young person. Now 20 years almost. It was 2005, I started doing lab testing on treadmills, testing metabolic efficiency, but getting into, low carb and not eating was 2005, 2007, and really figuring this out. But I found even 5 years ago, 3 years ago, just fasting and getting into that, it's like so much easier not to worry about what to eat. And I don't like to eat before I swim, bike, or run. As a triathlete, is just timing when I eat. So I have to prepare, like, okay, if I don't eat now, I'm not able to eat till 2:00 in the afternoon. Is that good for me? So my journey with fasted exercise is, I was doing it too much, is my point. And then I've started to play, like, would I feel better, recover better, and even, perform better in my workout that day if I had a little something? And so timing, eating, like having my coffee with some, Laird's creamer with the mushroom adaptogens in it and some MCT oil and maybe some collagen before a workout, and then be okay. So I'm getting some calories in. It might not be having a meal because I can't digest it in time before I go, say, swimming. But I think it's really learning what works for you, and not more is not better philosophy is what I've come to from my own journey, that I was like, oh, I won't eat till 3:00 when I get home. But I did, as a personal trainer, I was running with a client, then I go do my master swim. I lifted weights in the morning. And so I was active all day. It's like, yeah, I can thrive and brag that, oh, I haven't eaten until, since 24 hours suddenly, I'm so great at burning fat. But then it's like, okay, is that even good for me? Am I creating more damage? And I did my labs last year, like my thyroid hormones and reverse T3 and everything mess. And so that's kind of what I keep trying to share. The female athlete's different than the male athlete,
Sure.
But how much fasted exercise is causing us more damage than good.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and I know, like you said, I know, like Stacey Sims, I've read her work. I know she's not a fan of low carb really or fasting, but I think here the point for me is, if I have to set my life up in a way, if I can't get in 3,000 calories minimum a day, then I'm not running at all. And that's just, I have to do that for my own self, because I know as someone who struggled in the past with an eating disorder, I can certainly, like you said, I could be like, I'm going to run 8 to 10, and then I have a client, and then blah, 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 and it's 1 and I haven't eaten. But it's like, I have to be an adult or responsible enough to know, like, you know what, then guess what? I got to get up 2 hours earlier. So I'm going to have my first meal. I can't schedule that client. So if you can't do that, then, I think it all comes down to, like you said, how do I set things up to where I make sure I get enough? And if fasting, like the potential, fat burning advantage that you get from, working out fasted, I would much rather people make sure you get enough calories. Like if you can't do that and get enough calories, then don't do it at all,
Yeah, it's a toss up. So I know you're speaking at the same conference as I am this year. You're going the low carb cruise in May.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And then you're doing KetoCon, and you just were at last weekend in Boca Raton speaking. You do that?
Yeah. I was at Low Carb
Low Carb
USA a few weeks ago, and that was fantastic. I'm excited to go with Dr. Berry on the low carb cruise. That's pretty cool. And then I'll be at Low Carb USA in San Diego this coming August, and I'm also going to be at Con. So, and I'm putting together a low carb endurance masterclass to some of the things we're talking about, because people sometimes they just don't understand, like, why would I want to be a low carb runner? Or if I am a high carb runner, like, why can't I lose weight? Or why does my body hurt? So just some basic stuff, because some people tell me high carb works for them. That's fantastic. Great. But a lot of people find, they have GI issues. They're not losing weight. They're not recovering well. So just kind of some of the stuff that you and I've talked about, like, how can it benefit people? How can it make you potentially metabolically healthier and burn fat, and maybe even improve your overall mood? So putting together that class, so I'm excited about that.
So what are you speaking at the conferences coming up this year? Is that kind of the same thing when you're speaking?
No, actually I'll be speaking with Dr. Berry. I'll be speaking, well, I have a couple of different ones. I'm either going to talk about where the nutrition guidelines came from, because it's such a fun, bizarre story. I think most people probably believe it, it has to do with health or science or something, but it's just this crazy political, religion, nonsense, bizarre story. But I also will be presenting at KetoCon. I'll be presenting on eating disorders. So I'll specifically be talking about, some of the things that happen, specifically in anorexia, metabolism wise, and why the standard American diet really doesn't help heal you. Unfortunately, as I'm sure especially anorexia has a 50% relapse rate, has the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric disorder. The statistics are not good. So I'm advocating for an alternative approach. So that's my thoughts for that. I don't know. I haven't quite figured out what I'll do in San Diego yet, but probably something to do with, metabolism and mental health.
Great. Yeah, I'll be there in San Diego, Low Carb USA too. And the KetoCon and PaleoFX and Low Carb Cruise is super fun. So I will see you there.
Oh, cool. Fun.
Thanks so much for sharing your story today. And I hope we inspired some other people to look at their own fueling and training performing program and learn how to be more of an intuitive athlete and figure out what works best for them by experimenting. And it is that Goldilocks effect, finding, not too much, not too little, but the right amount is so unique to each individual. So try it out and see how you feel, how your workouts feel, how your sleep is, your recovery, all of that energy and anxiety should all improve over time. So keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you again so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.